welcome to the Praxis Behind the Obscure podcast. And today I have a special guest. He has a really great YouTube channel that I discovered, I think about a year ago, called the Nemeton. And what was cool about it is that he does go into sort of thelemic concepts and Hermetic concepts, but also has a really unique take on things that I find that it's almost hard to find in thelemic circles or Golden Dawn circles, and the fact that he focuses on Jewish Kabbalah. So can you kind of introduce yourself to the listeners and kind of a little bit about your journey and how you ended up sort of focusing on Jewish Kabbalah?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, thanks for having me. It's really nice to be here just to be able to like chat and talk about some stuff like this. Actually, the journey to Jewish Kabbalah is a lot longer than I think people suspect it to be. I really got into true occultism. Now, I mean, I was into some stuff when I was much younger, but I didn't really get into like true occultism very lightly until the Goetia around early college. And that just never really resonated with me. And I ended up becoming a Freemason. I joined when I was 19. Out here in the US, you can join at 18. I joined when I was 19, and I was raised about 7 months later, which I know in some areas that's pretty abnormal, but I went through the catechism really quickly, and I was pretty good at degree work, so it made it quite simple. And then going through Masonry for so many years, I became genuinely interested in things like Corpus Hermeticum. Now, I'd already read the Corpus before I became a member, but I didn't really read it. You know what I mean? Like, I just kind of knew there was something weird about it. Something stood out to me, and I'd heard of characters like Aleister Crowley, obviously. John Dee, I knew about him just through mutual friends. I had had a very light touch on a lot of different subjects over the years. And then in Freemasonry, I became far more comfortable with esotericism. Now, it's not because Masonry is itself esoteric by nature, but there are esoterically inclined and minded people inside the Masonic body. Not a lot, but they're around. And of course, me being so interested and invested in Masonry from a philosophical perspective, we gravitated to each other really well. Those same people would introduce me to a variety of things. And of course, the one book that I always kept hearing come up, even if it was from like a cringy New Age YouTube channel, was always Zohar. I had always heard the word Zohar, and I was like, okay, well, there's something about this book, and I had Wikipedia'd it, I'm sure, but it still didn't really like click with me. I just knew it's like, oh, it's some Jewish Kabbalah book, Later in life, not really. I mean, I was still very young, but post that, I ended up, I was at a relative's house. And I was walking past their bookshelf, and I saw a Hebrew letter Aleph on it, on the spine of a book. And I was like, what the hell is that? And I pulled it out, and sure enough, it said the Zohar on the front. And I was like, where did you get this? And they were like, oh, I got it with some group spirituality package or something, which at the time I was very antagonistic. I really thought the word spiritual itself was kind of not for me. I was weird about it.
Kind of corny.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, overused, very corny. But whatever, and I looked at it and I was like, do you want it? And they were like, well, yeah, it's mine. I was like, well, have you read it? And they were like, well, no, I haven't. I was like, I will gladly borrow it. And I still have it. It's years later. It's still in my room. They never got it back. They know I have it, and they've asked for it, but I know they won't read it. So yeah, I found the Zohar, and I went absolutely bananas. You hear about people finding something that really resonates with them, and they just become addicted to it. I 100% became addicted to the Zohar. I read religiously. I had read things like Sefer Yetzirah before. Years before Zohar, I'd read things like Sefer Yetzirah, but it never really touched me the same way that Zohar did. And I mean, I had hundreds of pages in front of my face all of a sudden. It wasn't the few small chapters of Sefer Yetzirah where I can like go read a Hermetic interpretation. I was sitting there and I was looking down at a full, like multiple 100-page work from 800 years before I was born, roughly. And it was absolutely enthralling. Everything about it was mesmerizing. You know, I'd always liked mysticism, and I knew a lot of general occult imagery from being a Mason and being invested in so many of these different spaces lightly. You know, I was always really big on symbols and symbolic representation, and I had a knack for ritualistic practice already. So whenever I was sitting there, like reading through this book and seeing how this very intense theological philosophy was capable of being shifted into something far more practical, which we would call modern Western occultism or modern Western magic. It was just, yeah, it was amazing. You know, I had felt like I had found the thing that I've been looking for so long. And that evolved into a lot of other things. You know, over time, the Zohar evolved into Tikkun HaZohar, also just general Kabbalah as a whole, rabbinical stuff, Talmudic things, Mishnah, you know, so Mishnah was a big piece for me, because there is mysticism in those works. You just have to know what you're looking for. You know, you have to be able to kind of read between the lines, and sometimes the rabbinical sages will allude to it to kind of remind you that there's more to what you're reading than simply, you know, wash your hands and change your clothes after such and such an event. You know, there's a lot going on there, particularly those involved with the temple practices, which the Mishnah covers a lot of in Kodesh Kodeshim, or the Holy of Holies. Also, the ritualistic sacrifices are part of the Mishnah, and the regulations and rules that are part of that. And there's a lot of mystery to that as well. So it was just eye-opening for me, at least.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. I come across a lot of people into the Hermetic Kabbalah side. And so I think it'd be kind of enlightening if you could, since you have experience, you know, obviously studying the Jewish side, and from your channel, you definitely have some experience with, you know, these days, like you're going over in your recent videos, I saw you're going over like some Golden Dawn stuff and thelemic concepts and, you know, the middle pillar and things along these lines. So what, you know, what would you say are like some key differences between the Hermetic and the Jewish side? And now that you're kind of also studying the Hermetic side as well, are there innovations that you find that are kind of interesting or useful, or that aren't necessarily in the Jewish side?
Really quick, could you hear that dog barking through the
yeah, I heard that. It's okay though. It's okay.
All right. As long as it doesn't bother you too much. I feel bad. I can't really regulate them whenever I'm in the room, which is unfortunate. But no. So there's a lot to be considered between the Hermetic and the Jewish side. And I think the main difference is really just I almost want to say the end goal, right? So the objective is different typically, and the manner by which it like represents itself is different. So let's take a look at like path working and Hermeticism, right? Now they do have this in Jewish Kabbalah as well, but 9 times out of 10, when you hear about path working and Hermetic Kabbalah, you have a pretty good understanding of what this entails, right? This is a developmental process, typically engaged through magical ritual that affects your life in a variety of ways. And then you are changing, you know, you're developing these revelations. And particularly there's this kind of perspective in this almost like classic sort of RPG kind of way of development, you know, and I don't mean that in a rude way. I just mean that's a very straightforward manner of looking at it.
Sure.
And then in the Jewish Kabbalah, these particular energetic forces, you don't really like touch them a whole lot. That's kind of the best way I can explain it. You know, they're far more just conceptual in nature. You know, there's a lot more generalized metaphysics, but I find that the Jewish Kabbalah, while it has far more extravagant metaphysical like ideas, you know, like the chambers of Elohim and things like that, which are very complex, very strange, almost akin to the Aethers in a way, are at the same time not things that you don't just go hang out there. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like that kind of stuff. You don't perform a ritual and just go hang out in these spaces. Now, are there Rabbanan in the past who have claimed to go to these different worlds and such? Historically speaking, there are Rabbanan who have claimed and made claim, and many people have believed have actually been able to essentially go to these other places. They have the capacity to do it through a particular level of personal holiness, maybe a certain level of like revelation in the Torah and spiritual insights through the Kabbalah or the tradition, and are essentially far more of what we would see discussed in the Hermetic style. Now, granted, the manner by which they do this can be done through a variety of other ways, and they tend to focus more on this theological component of Kabbalah, right? So in Hermeticism, there is, the religion is still there in a way. We see the usage of the divine names in the LBRP. We see a lot of reverence for the Spheritic forms, right? Like on their particular implements and everything like that, like the fire wand and the pentacle and the air dagger, the athame, right? They're inscribed with these particular names which have purpose. But those correlations or correspondences, as we most often hear them called, really do have, at the end of the day, a religious purpose. Now, I don't believe the HOGD uses it in a religious manner, but it is where it comes from. So in the Jewish Kabbalah, we see a lot more of this theological aspect. I had a person just earlier today, ask me, like, I learned some Jewish Kabbalah, I was studying the Zohar and stuff like that. I don't understand what to do. And I was like, of course you don't, because to be honest, much of the traditional Kabbalah, particularly the one that is involved in like the Zohar and such, you really do kind of practice Judaism for the most part. Like all the particular revelations dealing with Shabbat, with davening, with Devekut, and like all the little mannerisms and such. Abraham Abulafia's particular practices and such, like all these things come from a far more common spiritual background, one that we don't find in the Hermetic order necessarily.
So, as you're explaining this, it really, I thought of the analogy like the Jewish Kabbalah, since it's sort of integrated with one theology, one sort of ontology and praxis, being sort of like Apple, where everything's, you have the Apple iOS, you have the Apple chips, you have the Apple system, everything's one sort of closed system, whereas, and integrated, right? Whereas where you have the Windows, you have all this third-party software and you're throwing all these things together, sort of a mishmash, right? It would be like the Hermetic Kabbalah, right? Is that a pretty good comparison, would you say?
I think that's a phenomenal analogy from what I've seen thus far. Jewish Kabbalah does have a variety of lineages, right? The Rabbanan don't always agree with each other, and various rabbinical sages, I shouldn't say rabbinical sages because that refers to a very specific group of people. But the Rabbanan, when we think of someone like the Baal Shem Tov, right? Or like Vilna of Gaon or Isaac Luria or Moshe Cordovero, like these very famous Kabbalistically inclined Rabbanan, they have a teacher-student lineage, technically speaking, and their particular take can be different. And it may disagree with each other, and it may be entirely oral. We don't fully know. You can't just walk up and find out. The people aren't walking around and they're like, oh yeah, I've learned directly from the Baal Shem Tov. In fact, that's a modern argument today between Michael Laitman and Rav Berg, right? Which is the Kabbalah Center for Berg and KabbalahInfo.com or whatever. Michael Laitman did some series or something like that back in the early 2000s or late 90s to try to spread Kabbalah. They both did attempt to spread Kabbalah, and they both also claimed to be students of the lineage of the Baal Shem Tov, Yehuda Ashlag. So those things can be very particular, but it always comes back down to the general theological practice of Judaism, right? Which again, it gives them like a foundation to work with, right? Kabbalah branches off of that. We have an accepted series of texts, and of course everything is always going to run back down to the Torah. So we're really liberated from the overarching issue of like confusion and argumentation. Not to say that we don't argue, because there's a lot of jokes about that. There's definitely plenty of argumentation to be done in the Kabbalah, but it's different. I find, and in the Hermetic Kabbalah, you mentioned this idea of third-party software. In many ways, right? It is, because what is the HOGD but a fusion of like some alchemical imagery, some like far more modern Western occultism through its representations, like if we look at like Rider-Waite Tarot, the four implements, we have something along the lines of like Masonic initiatic practices, by Masonic I mean specifically Freemasonry, And then we have the incorporation of the magic that we would find popular with someone like Eliphas Levi, you know. So it is. I find that most of it is a mismatch. Now, is that bad or wrong? No, I don't think so. In fact, I believe that the HOGD does a pretty solid job. In fact, I kind of feel the same way about Thelema as a whole, conceptually speaking. Now, in practice, all these things change. Once you start putting human beings into the mix, it all changes. But it face value, you know, it's all good. But yes, they're definitely a big conglomerate of a lot of different things. Many of us are, you know.
Yeah, very interesting. To kind of go back earlier on what you're saying about like pathworking and the Hermetic style, a lot of it's like working in the astral and with these visualizations and ceremonial magic and things along these lines, right? But on the Jewish Kabbalistic side, is it more, would you describe it more as like mystical contemplation, perhaps, rather than this astral or magical workings? Is that sort of is that like a fundamental difference, or is that part of the practice?
It's strange because the answer is really yes and no. So for example, like I once did a video on candle meditation, right? Now that comes straight out of the Zohar. That's a particular meditation that comes out of the Zohar of concentrating on the candle flame and you know, meditating on the particular metaphysical interrelations that all the different physical symbols have in, you know, in relation to something much higher than just a literal physical candle, right? And how you relate to that. It is a meditation. It can induce a similar experience to kind of what we would see in the HOGD. Like you can have a, you know, very internal, mental, almost like this idea of like an astral experience from that meditation. But is that really the goal? Not necessarily. It is, again, contemplative in nature. That's kind of its base point. So it's weird because, you know, like I said, it's like it's inclusive. Like, yeah, technically they do relate in one way, but is that really the main objective? I wouldn't say so. In fact, I find that Jewish Kabbalah tends to be far more leveled out because everything always comes back down to how it impacts your daily life, right? Like talking about the 50 gates of understanding, which I brought up a couple of times recently, you know, each gate of understanding is something you can literally do in the world. You know, I mean, like, what is it, like gate 49 or 50 or whatever is, you know, properly quoting people who you cite. You know what I mean? So if you like quote someone, you say who it is. So that way you're not taking their information from them.
Right. Giving props.
Right. But if we were to look at the Hermetic Kabbalah and I was like, yes, the gate of understanding, and I mean this in a dramatic way, I'm not being serious, but if you were to hear about the gates of understanding, you might be thinking about something very, very different than quoting someone. You know what I mean? So it's that sort of thing.
Interesting. So there's a lot of emphasis on the practical in daily life and what have you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, interesting. You do draw a distinction between like the ultimate goal of the practice, right? So in a lot of the Hermetic Kabbalah, it's sort of this theurgy, basically, right? Sort of this practice of high magic or uniting with the Godhead or what have you, right? With the Jewish Kabbalah, I know that actually, I think I asked you this via chat, but there are different interpretations too, right? You have somebody like David Hyam Smith, who's this non-dual, right?
He's a non-emanationist. Yeah, he's a non-emanationist. Yeah.
Right. But the majority are stemming from an emanationist theory. Is that correct? And what would you say? Okay. And what would you say is the goal for in the Jewish aspect? Is it sort of a divine worship? You know,
well, there's a couple of stages in that. Obviously, the immediate theological one is going to be messiahship, right? Now, I don't mean personal messiahship. I mean, like, literally, like, you know, as we would say in Hebrew, like Hamashiach, right? For the Messiah to show up, like, actively, you know, which is similar to the Christians waiting for Jesus to come back, right? That's really, like, that's kind of the goal. Not including being a decent person and following the regulations of the mitzvahs or anything like that, but that is essentially one of the goals. One of the mystical goals is Tikkun HaOlam, right, which is the rectification of the world. Now, the rectification of the world is a very strange thing, and you can ask a couple of different people and they'll give you different answers on what it really means. Some people will say, oh, it means making the world a better place here physically. Some people will say it's purely this spiritual component that involves like Yehudim, which is like the divine unifications, just these really intense spiritual revelations. And like the world over, right? Like, so we, you know, as many of the New Agers would say, we come to a new level of consciousness. And then there's people who kind of mix them together. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, the world should be better. Spiritually, we should be better. And the manner by which we define that changes. But yeah, the general goals are typically not as self-interested, right? So that's something to say about the Jewish Kabbalah. They tend to not be as self-interested outside of like Kabbalah Ma'asid, right, which is the practical, the talismanic kamayot and everything like that. But because of its theological component, it does tend to really center itself on, you know, what we expect of common religion. And I don't mean that in a rude way, but that's really what it is. In the Hermetic style, I find a lot more interest in protecting oneself or changing, you know, your nature, or exploring other worlds and things like that. And by other worlds, that's just a very dramatic way for me to say, you know, like the Sphorothic forms or something like that, which of course are conceptual in nature, and and you learn from those experiences, from those engagements and everything. But even my Reform friends who study Zohar a lot don't really, they're not, you know, waving wands around or anything like that, you know. So it's very different.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a very interesting explanation. I have been reading, or actually recently read, some of Aaron Leach's work, and I know that you've been recently working with some Enochian stuff, and he really, in one of his books called The Angelic Language Volume 1, he makes a lot of comparisons between the 50 Gates of Understanding, and Liber Loga, Scrying the Aethers, and also a lot of parallels between Merkaba mysticism. And so now that you've just recently started getting into Enochian, I believe, right?
Oh yeah, very recently.
Okay. I'm kind of curious, like, do you see, so I mean, do you see this being connected ultimately to Jewish mysticism, sort of like the parallels that Leach is, you know, brings up in his books, or do you see something totally different?
I haven't read Leach's works to confirm something like that.
Okay.
But what I can say is, just from entertaining the text of like John Dee's diaries, which, you know, like book 6 and things like that, I have realized that. So Kabbalah is a tricky word, and I'm gonna explain that. So when I'm reading a work like this, so, you know, Enochian is predominantly Christian, right? It has a lot of Christian influences, but at the same time, it has a lot of Kabbalistic influences. And the Christian Kabbalah is much bigger than we think it is. There's not a lot of books on it. There's not a whole lot to really get into it, because they just kind of look at it as mystical Christianity. However, the influences that we see in like general occultism, particularly that of the Grimoire tradition, fused with the theological nature of Kabbalah, and if you slam those two things together, Enochian shows up. You know, that's really what I see. I see a heavy emphasis on the idea of accessing spiritual spaces, which is going to be typically a little bit more of the theological, almost theurgical kind of side of things, but at the same time, the manner by which you do it is far more grimoiric, you know. So going into Enochian, I've seen a lot more of this kind of grimoiric association of like, how do you like, how are they contacting these spirits? What are they doing? I mean, they're scrying, right? They have psychics, you know, not to dog Edward Kelly. You see what I'm saying, though? You know, they have psychics, and they have all these strange, almost things that you would expect to see in Hollywood movies, you know. And the reliquary, I can't say that word, reliquary or whatever. You know, these designated spaces, this far more traditional conception of magical practice in the Western style, fused with all these big spiritual components that we see in something like the Zohar. Now, I have not seen a lot of general Zohar reference or anything like that, but in terms of what you might find in something like the Christian Kabbalah, this particular Jesus emphasis, using divine names to have dominion over something. Okay, now that's old school, right? That's not I can't even claim that from Zohar or the Grimoire tradition. That's just pretty much as classic as it gets.
Right.
In fact, if you really get into the Bible, this is where everyone's going to fall out, right? Because I just said the word Bible. If you really get into the Bible, it's believed. So Moses kills an Egyptian guy, right? Do you know about that?
I've heard something about that. Yeah, I don't know the details.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, Moses watches this Egyptian taskmaster or whatever, beating this slave, and he kills him, but it doesn't really describe how he kills him. And the belief is that he uttered one of the divine names properly on purpose, and just guy dies. So I mean, this is it's like one of the most old school ideas out there, is that the employment of divine names to cause something to happen. It's very, very old. And we find, or at least I find, time and time again in the Grimoire tradition, even the Solomonics, you know what I mean? It's like I've met some really edgy Solomonics out there, and they're just like, yeah, I work with demons. I'm like, do you though? Do you really? Because I mean, you got all these names of God and crap written around all over your circles and everything. It's just it's a cute little conception that's lasted through history for a very, very long time, and I think that holds some weight. And that is also very popular in the Zohar. The usage of divine names is massive. Also, just in Judaism, right? Just from metaphysical analysis in general Judaism, it's very important. I don't know if that actually answered the question, by the way. I tried to.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, though, that just recently you've started kind of diving into Enochian. It's been something, how you kind of mentioned that the Zohar for you, you're sort of instantly attracted to it, and then you came across a book and you started doing this. It's almost like you went down the rabbit hole. That's kind of how I've been with Enochian for the past couple of years. So it is one of those systems that is so complex, and there's so many diaries to go through and so many interpretations on Praxis. And the one thing that I find common, though, in Enochian is that if you actually do it, it has almost instantaneous effects. Like other things, like meditation, you have to, or pranayama, these are things like you build up on, right? Or other magical practices like the LBRP. But pretty much everyone I've talked to who's actually done an Enochian, let's say scrying text, scrying one of the aethers, like they instantaneously have a very dramatic effect on their consciousness and have visual, either visual, auditory, or other sort of experiences, right? So I find that very, very fascinating. It's almost like it works right out of the package, right? Like it's potent, so to speak.
See, that's what's so interesting about it, right? So I even did a quick live stream today about it, just because I love Zohar. I love all the stuff that I do. I mean, I've even got these are technically spherothic diagrams, right? This is a perfected tree, and that is just a single circle, both of which represent the same thing, technically speaking. And even having so much time in these spaces, right? Because even though I'm not really much of a hermeticist, doesn't mean I haven't done anything with it before. And of course, those are very interesting situations and all that. Even just the intellectual aspect of mysticism can be very changing. Even though it doesn't look ritualistic, it by its very nature, you have an object of focus, you put effort into it and energy into it, and you're literally sucking information out of this piece of paper. Which I know that's not that entertaining to people, but at the end of the day, it is relatively the same in some regards. The objective simply is to learn, right? So if you were to well, what's your intention of this? Well, it's to learn. It's a very quick way to do it too. But Enochian, the reason I even made the discussion today and I've committed myself to it is because I did something very similar. I was like, you know what? I want to learn this. I have this massive book with me that a friend bought for me. An Eastern Orthodox priest bought this for me when I graduated college, and I never opened it. And I have some friends who are really into Enochian. And I started discussing it with them, and they were like, yeah, just do this. Just say this. And I, just kept reading. I didn't really do anything. I just kept reading until I came across book 6 and where they actually have the 19th call or whatnot. And I was like, okay, cool. This was like 3 a.m. I was like, yeah, sure. I'll go give it a whirl. I mean, I'm here by myself anyway. I might as well, you know what I mean? I got nothing going on. And the dogs were asleep. Thank God. Yeah. Yeah. And Yeah, it was interesting because I could feel something was happening
Hmm.
before I even got to finish.
Hmm.
Right, like the strangeness. I don't even know how to explain exactly what it was that I was experiencing, aside from a simple uneasiness, not a lack of comfort, but a simple uneasiness that started like welling up. And uh and I was just like, I'm just going to keep reading, right? And then of course the further and further I went, almost the intensity of it kind of grew, slowly but surely, up
Right.
until the point that I hit, a meditative state coming out of it. And I just kind of sat there and had a very strange, really, honestly, the kind of experience that I think a lot of people want.
Right.
It in no way was affirming,
Hmm.
didn't boost my ego, gave me zero sense of pride. In fact, it made me feel very, very small, and really out of out of my own head.
Mm.
Is almost like a spiritual drug in a way.
Right.
And
Right. Almost like a
yeah,
mini psychedelic experience. That's how it is for me as well. It's like that sort of, you mentioned something's changing, you feel kind of uneasy. It's almost like the acid's about to kick in and things are sort of, the nerves are coming in and you feel something changing. And then you have a visionary experience and you kind of ride it out to that smooth,
yeah,
afterglow, and things in your ego are sort of exposed and what have you, right? And
yeah,
so,
absolutely.
yeah, it's a very interesting system. So looking forward to, I mean, your content's great. So I'm looking forward to, if you put any Enochian stuff out there, I'll definitely put that, link that up and everything. But to go back to an earlier, we're going on all these tangents here, but, the Zohar has really been an area of focus. I mean, it's almost, it seems inaccessible for many people, right? It's this huge book. It's almost daunting in any way. Where would you recommend somebody who listens to this podcast? They're like, oh wow, this is, I'm really resonating with this. Where would you recommend them to start? Are there like, are there sort of like primers for it, or like, or even a method of studying it that you would recommend, or is it sort of just you have to figure it out on your own kind of thing? What would you say?
There's three ways to read Zohar, and I covered this a couple of years ago. And I don't know if you've heard of him, but there's another channel called Esoterica, and
Oh
I
yeah.
think he also covered this in a recent discussion, because it is something that needs to be talked about. I think a lot of people, it's so the thing about the Zohar is it's intimidating, right?
Mhm.
It's intimidating. The language is weird. In fact, a lot of people, we really just don't have the mindset for it. We don't have the particular like grammatical and linguistic style to really see like where something's supposed to be important and
Mhm.
where something's just supposed to be like text, which everything in Zohar is important, by the way, but that's neither here nor there. Um, so the main recommendation I would make is there really isn't a primer. If you want to do general Kabbalah and then do Zohar later, maybe read Reshit Hokmah, which is Beginning of Wisdom. It's free on Safaria. Maybe read Hagiga 12b to get some like older, more Talmudic understandings of like the layers of the world of Yetzirah, because that is what that's about. I've done a couple talks about that in private. I have them recorded. If anyone ever wants to see them, I'll just give it to them. It's unlisted. Maybe familiarize yourself with some of the Kabbalistic expectations in the Judaic style, because it is a little different, like Tzimtzum and everything like that.
Mhm.
Particularly from a rabbinical perspective, that's a big deal, because it
Mhm.
will fluctuate. Like if you talk to a Thelamite about Tzimtzum, it's not the same as talking to a rabbinical person about it, because what is important to each character is different, right? The objective is
Mhm.
different, as I mentioned earlier, which changes the way you look at the information. Your end goal shifts everything about your paradigm and how you approach something that you're reading.
Mhm.
Um, Now, if you really want to do it, though, even if you think the Zohar is intimidating, pick up something easy like the Berg translation.
Mhm.
Skip those first couple hundred pages of the prologue, go straight to Bereshit or Genesis,
Mhm.
and just start reading it. Read the first chapter. I mean, the chapters are relatively short. Read the first chapter. If you don't understand anything, read it a second time. You might get a little bit more. You might not get anything. And if you don't, keep reading. Don't repeat it over and over and over again. Go on to the next pieces. And the reason you do that is because you're familiarizing yourself with the language and the metaphysical scenario that's going on. You have to think about it contextually, like in what order are these things occurring? What's happening here? Why is it happening here? Maybe try to visualize it a little bit. Don't go too crazy with that. because it is intangible, right? The process of emanation, particularly in the early section of Bereshit, has no real manifestable nature to it. And the thing about the Zohar that I think bugs a lot of people, even if they don't know about it, is you'll receive the answer to something in one chapter 200 pages later. Now, you don't know that, they're not doing the same discussion at that point. But the thing that you didn't get on page like 200, when you read page 400, page 200 makes perfect sense all of a sudden. So that's a really common issue. I wouldn't even really call it an issue. They kind of just expect you to know it. You really do have to just become super familiar with the information. If you strictly like metaphysics, at least read through Bereshit, which I think for like the Berg translation is just volume 1 and 2. I know there's like 23 volumes or whatever. Truly there's 22, but there's like an extra one, I think, if I can remember correctly. But just General Bereshit is very good. And the thing is, when you hit Exodus and all that and beyond, you will see that there is a lot of more and more theological things. They start talking about things that are far more relative to Judaism, right? So I find that a lot of people struggle with that part, because learning Judaism in and of itself is already a task. Like that's a huge task, because many people who ever pick up the Zohar and want to actually know it were not raised in a Jewish environment, nor do they understand the intricacies of Shabbat or anything like that. In fact, I am one of those people. It took me a very, very long time and a lot of dedication to actually get to the point where I was like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here now. It's a very long road. But that shouldn't scare anybody. I believe that it is accessible far more than we think it is. It's just not, you're not just going to go pick up Basic Witch, you know what I mean, from your local Barnes and Noble and walk out with it and be, just be able to flip to whatever page and finish it in a couple hours. In reality, Kabbalah is very much like a lifelong pursuit. Like you don't finish Kabbalah. It never ends, really. And if someone tells you that they know all the secrets of Kabbalah, they're absolutely full of it, because you can't actually finish. In my opinion.
Would you say there's a lot of value, to studying the Zohar and these texts, even if one it doesn't necessarily have an affinity for the Jewish worldview or Judaism in general? Would you say there's value for, occultists or atheists or, people in general?
It's not so much about whether it's an atheistic or theistic person. The reason it's valuable, the best way for me to put this is, in an occult world, far too often we contextualize our information purely in the mental sphere. Right. We are lovers of learning 9 times out of 10. And the way that we incorporate that into our daily life for a ceremonialist, for example, is going to be through magical operation. Right. For someone who's not a ceremonialist, it may just, give us some general insight. The power of the Zohar, and I know that sounds cringy, but this is really my full insight of it. The power of the Zohar is it allows you to emotionally incorporate things. It has a special advantage, and I don't know why exactly. I don't know exactly where it comes from, but it has the acute advantage of being able to connect you emotionally to something rather than just intellectually and physically. And I find that 9 times out of 10, that tends to be the most difficult thing for many people to do. Whenever you're, for example, when you're dealing with okay, let's just simple example. I didn't get to talk about this in the live stream, so this will be a great opportunity. When you're doing the LBRP and you're reciting the God names and all that, or not reciting, but you have the God names within the 4 pentagrams, right?
Sure.
My relationship to those God names is very different than the average, well, not average, but the general person's relationship to those God names in an occult sphere, because I literally have an emotional connection to them. They incorporate themselves some way into the world of which I am a part of, not just as, oh, this is a very powerful divine name, or it's mentally, like I'm not just thinking like, oh, it's associated with this sphirot or this particular nature, or it's, used in this particular area of like Torah or something like that. Like, no, like there's a push behind it. There's some sort of resonance that I can feel connected to, because it plays a role in the greater schema of all these things. And that emotional state is very effective. And I believe that because it's so neglected, we see a lot of different issues in occultism as a whole. In fact, the main emotion that is associated with occultism in the modern era, in my opinion, is desperation and also anger. I believe that desperation and anger also including frustration in this case, are the two main emotions that get associated with magical practices with most people. And that's not always the case, obviously. Some people are just doing the ritual out of the sake of doing something repetitively, you know. So there may be no real emotion at all other than melancholy. But to be able to actually experience something and to feel close to a practice in that way without needing the years and years of development of just doing it over and over again until all of a sudden you feel close to it is a big deal. Like, I mean, like, I don't say Michael, right? I don't say like Michael at my right hand. I say Mikhail, right? And that's a much older rendition of the same characterization. It has a very special place, you know, in the greater scheme of metaphysics that I do have an emotional connection to. Therefore, you know, I believe in a particular manner that helps me very greatly.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. Sounds almost like more grounded in daily reality versus a name that you might vibrate to have some sort of specific magical effect. That seems like a key distinction. Yeah. Okay, cool. Speaking of practices, we're talking a lot about different practices, but we haven't really talked about your own. So do you have specific daily practices or regular practices that you do? Maybe not daily, but, you know, periodically or, you know,
well,
things along those lines. Yeah.
For the longest time, it was just Shema, right? Which is the daily prayers. Some of the particular Judaic prayers I've been into, which are actually part of just general orthodoxy. I mean, they're part of Judaism in general, but general orthodoxy tends to really go to town on these to make sure that they maintain it and everything like that. So that was what I was doing for the longest time. When I was really engaged in Freemasonry, this was the particular practice of the ceremonies, particularly the initiatic ones. Now, as time went on, particularly when I realized that I was having a problem, getting interested in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, am now obsessed with LBRPing and middle pillaring and all that, which I believe that all those things are just a big grounding ritual, by the way. I know people would hate to hear me say that, you know, but it's just, I do. I see many of them as just really elaborate grounding rituals. You know, LBRP, the particular banishing, followed up by the meditative and balancing state of the middle pillar ritual, followed by, you might do an adepti meditation, or is it the neophyte? Maybe, I can't remember which one it is, but the particular meditation that can come post that, at least by recommendation of one of my friends, and then you run right back into another grounding practice. You know, the whole thing is just a big grounding ritual, in my opinion. So, but also the repetition of it is very good. And of course, every occultist who wants to be taken seriously is going to say that. They're all going to be, oh, daily practice is a big deal. In fact, people who don't do daily practice spew that because they know that people want to hear that. It's almost like a moniker of a committed. No, really though. Come on, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
The moniker.
It's like, do you even lift, bro? Do you even LBRP, bro?
Right,
pillar, bro.
Whoa, you didn't do general invocation this morning before you woke up, or after you woke up? That's total trash, man. Total fucking trash. It's like skipping leg day, you know?
Right.
It's one of those things that, of course, I'm going to promote daily ritual, but by God, who doesn't? You know what I mean? Who doesn't? But my particular practices, they've expanded because I got bored. The Judaic stuff has always worked really well for me, even though it's particularly just the theological practices, right? I have had Kabbalistic practices, but none of those were ever daily. They were always particular to a particular, or they were always specific to a particular scenario or situation. Like maybe I wanted to have a meditative experience, or I wanted to be able to reflect a little bit on something. That's where something like the general candle meditation would come in. There's a variety of different Kabbalistic meditations, though, which would take forever to even really get into.
Sure.
But then, of course, incorporating GD stuff was really fun for me. You know, I mean, in no way was it really foreign because the Zohar uses a lot of the general symbolism that we see in GD, but just on a much more extravagant scale. Sure. So making that transition was quite simple. And I had already been familiar with the implements and stuff like that. And who hasn't heard of the LPRP? So adding that in has essentially become the main segment of my daily stuff. Is exactly what I was doing with the tack on of the Golden or Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn stuff. And now, out of pure interest alone, Enochian. And I don't know exactly what cued in all the Enochian stuff, because in fact, the one friend who knows a lot about it that I really wanted to learn with told me that I was not ready. And I was like, yeah, screw you. I'm going to do it anyway. And now they're helping me, relatively speaking.
Yeah, very interesting. All right, cool. Your channel is really interesting. What I'm curious is like, what inspired you to start the channel, and are there any like future projects coming up, or any sort of? I noticed you've been doing a lot more live streams and things along these lines. So, can you share a little bit about the creation of the channel, kind of the direction you're taking these days?
Okay, so the channel was made because when I was a Freemason, I was part of the academic groups, right? So I gave a couple lectures around my state. And when I gave a lecture, people really liked it, but I didn't get to do a whole lot of them because I was very young. You know what I mean? Not only that, not all lodges want to have a lecturer all the time. It can be very irritating for some of the members and stuff. They don't want to sit there and listen to anybody talk about something. So that was irritating. And I remember feeling a sense of frustration with also just like the general online occult world. I didn't know about the occult world on the internet. I thought it didn't exist. All I knew was that spirit science existed, and that drove me absolutely insane. Oh no, really, I hated it.
Okay.
Hated it so much. So after I'd been invested in the Corpus Hermeticum and also been learning a little bit about Druidism, very lightly about Druidism through the Masonic lens, and a variety of other bodies, even basic Kabbalah and such, I was just like, you know what, I'm going to make a YouTube channel. And it was hilarious because I didn't know anything about graphic design. I'd never made a video before. I barely was making music because I thought it was fun. Like I did it as a hobby. And I woke up and I remember the first image I ever made was an 8-pointed star and a yod. It was the letter Yod, the Hebrew letter Yod in the middle of it. And that was it. That was my moniker, so to say. And I named it the Nemeton because when I was so into Druidism, from that Masonic lens, I felt like that was a good synchronistic symbol, right? So when we think about the world of Binah and such, or the Sphirot Binah and the world of Bria, we see this particular grove concept, these gardens, right? Gan. For example, like there's Gan Eden, right? The Garden of Eden, but where is Eden? No one really asked that, which is kind of a funny little thing because it also says a river runs out of Eden to water the garden. So Eden and the Garden of Eden are not actually even the same place, which is kind of funny. I don't think a lot of people know that. That's just a little tidbit for people's entertainment, I guess. So this idea of the garden, right, was a big portion of the naming process. But yeah, so I made it because I hated spirit science and I couldn't find an outlet, and I wanted an outlet. I wanted to find an esoteric community, and I couldn't find one, so I thought I would just make one. I was a terrible video maker. I was really, really bad, and some of those videos are still up. I've left them up as a remembrance of how much I changed. And then one day, I remember I had like 1,200 subscribers at this point. Somehow, I don't know why they followed me. My God. And I remember I had a camera, one of my family members' cameras, like, just like a little snap camera that also had video properties to it. And that was when I made the What is Occultism and Why I Love It video. And that changed everything, because I had done a couple of more live videos off of the computer, which is like my Monad video and my Freemasonry and Kabbalah video, which is when I was getting used to actually being on camera. And but yeah, the What is Occultism and Why I Love It video is the one that changed everything. And after that, things really started ramping up. I had a really weird spiritual experience, which is where the character of the Nemeton comes from, right?
Okay. So the mask, the black mask.
Yeah, the mask and the tallit and everything like that. Yeah, so that all comes from that particular spiritual experience. Um, and yeah, things have developed like crazy, right? I've done so many different styles. I've had so many different types of videos, so many different subjects lightly covered and touched on. Most of them I try to do is introductory, and I've been told that typically that is not what happens. They're not advanced, but they're not introductory either. So they're in this weird limbo of not everyone gets it, and then some people do, and some people who are really advanced feel like it's not enough for them, but they still acknowledge that it's like not beginner friendly. It's weird. It's a weird situation.
I think it's a great channel because it I mean, I think that especially for, I guess you would say, GD or Thelemic occultists, it's good because it gives you a different lens to view things through, and it gives you different understandings, different interpretations, and you're coming from obviously more of a traditional Jewish practice, which I think, and obviously your own experiences and your own studies and things like that, right? And so I think that all too often it's easy to get stuck into one worldview or reality tunnel where you're bringing at least a different perspective and opinion to the table, which I think is really where a lot of the value, at least when I watch your videos. I can only speak for myself, right? But that's at least where I get the value.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to know that, and of course it's funny because in learning so much Jewish Kabbalah, I have become very interested in things like Thelema and like the Hermetic orders, and even more back into Freemasonry, like I was originally, and now Enochian. It has allowed me to find great interest in a variety of spaces. But I guess what was the other part of the question? Oh, where am I going with it? Right. Okay, so that is a very complicated question. Currently, many people have noticed that I am not able to maintain the same audio quality I used to have, and I am a bit of a perfectionist. That's to be known. I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I care very greatly about like my backdrops, even. You know what I mean? I do. I care about these things. I'm very much about presentation. So currently, I'm doing the live streams because that's the most convenient thing for me. The standard videos I plan to have come back really in full swing once I can get back to the quality that I'm used to. But that's not everything. I don't know if you saw it, but I did a light little LBRP animation. It's a very, very simple animation, but it's three-dimensional. I did it in After Effects. It took me a couple hours because I'm not adept at 3D animation in any way, shape, or form. So the real goal, I had a guy ask me this one time, what is it that I want to do? I essentially want to eventually one day, just repeated myself 3 times, have full-blown videos. And what I mean by full-blown is like, when I talk about something, I almost want you to be able to see exactly how I imagine it. Not to control how you imagine it, but to just give you more insight into what it is that I'm thinking about. Like I would like for people to be able to see these weird metaphysical scenarios almost as perfectly as I could possibly express it through my own imagination, put into video form. Will that take forever? Probably so. Would it be amazing for a variety of people? Yeah, totally. It'd be really great. It would be, in fact, in my personal opinion, it would probably be mesmerizing. It would be the final stamp of everything that I could possibly do. In the meantime, though, with the live streams and stuff, one thing of why I'm even doing the live streams with my audio not being as good is because I really, when I became obsessed with production, right? When I was making live streams because I said I would, when I was making videos just because I had to put something out, and I still wanted it to be a certain thing, but I had to put something out in my mind. I became addicted to the idea of the cycle. Many creators become addicted to that. And I had a lot of support at the time that do that, and they were like, hey, regular uploads, just if it's not what you want it to be, just put it out anyway. And that was really detrimental for me personally. That is not my idea of making content.
So you gain in the algorithms, but you lose in your soul and the content of the sort of integrity and the image of what, or the overall vision of what you're trying to put out there. I agree.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at the videos that I put out before the Babylon video. You know what I mean? The videos that I was putting out before then, the candle meditation video doesn't count because I've been thinking about that video for months before that video went out. The Babylon video I've been thinking about for a while too. you can tell that those two videos have a certain level of personality and soul to them that a great majority of the other ones don't have the same advantage, and they don't have that same care and excitement in them. You know, you can see the ingenuity that I put into some of the visuals and stuff like that just to try to express something. Or in the Babylon video, I had a lot of fun. You know, the music choices, the live portions into the visual portions, the ending, right? Many people like the ending. It's all of those decisions were things that I felt inspired to do. And having that inspiration to actually do something is really integral, in my opinion, to the occult experience. The occultism and humanity are one and the same. You know, you can't really pull mysticism out of the human being and have it exist of its own accord outside of that, because it demands us as the main component for it to even exist to begin with. Same thing for religion and theology. So the humanity has to be maintained. Otherwise, you have nothing but dead words. And for a few of the videos in the past that I had made, I felt like they were dead words. Not that they were incorrect. The videos were still accurate in terms of an intellectual standpoint or an informational standpoint, but that almost artistic aspect had completely died. And yeah, so I felt like I became disconnected from the people who I originally wanted to really enjoy the videos and everything like that. And they still like the stuff I make and I still enjoy them. So my plan was, well, while I'm waiting, I'm just going to do live streams as much as possible, as conveniently as possible, to, you know, talk with them, to be engaged with them, you know.
Yeah, good. Okay. Well, yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to, you know, your future videos, and I do like the direction the channel's taking. I do like, I do really look forward to the like 3D animations and stuff like that. I think that sort of, you know, the coming together of like mysticism and esotericism and technology is an area that really fascinates me as well. So look forward to that. But yeah, I think we have to probably have to call it here. But
all right,
maybe you can let the listeners, where can people find you? You know what? I think you have a Patreon as well. Maybe you can share some information.
Yeah. So I am youtube.com/the Nemeton. Right. It's pretty quick to find just online, unless you pick up Teen Witch, because there's a scene called the Nemeton, unfortunately for me. Yeah, I'm on like Instagram and Twitter and stuff like that. I mean, you can see it now on the live stream. I'm going to have it as a little banner at the base and everything. So it's really easy to figure out where I am. But yeah, the main space is the YouTube channel. You know, you can always get in touch with me there. I pretty much respond to every single comment I've ever had. And I think my record right now is somewhere around like 40,000 comments or something like that. I've had a lot.
Wow.
Yeah.
What video is that on?
Oh, no, not one video. I mean, collectively.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, wow, that's a real viral video right there.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have 13,000 subs if I had a video with 40,000.
Right. I was like, oh, yeah, something's not right. Yeah. Okay, cool. You're very, very responsive on there. All right. Well, I'll include the link to your YouTube channel and other, you know, other things like your Patreon and social media in the show notes. And thanks for coming on. And until next time.
Hey, well, thanks for having me. Have a good one.